Dr. Barrington Brennen is no stranger to us. He's one of our local professionals that we turn to. He is well uh, versed in this topic, and he will bring his remarks and presentation today on domestic violence and the church. Dr. Barrington Brennen, please.
Good morning. 172 years ago, on July 1948, a political and social environment was born. 300 persons, and mostly women, just 40 men traveled by horse drawn wagons and by foot from up to 50 miles away to Seneca Falls, New York, to protest the legal bondage of American women and to demand full equality. It has been a long and exceeding difficult journey. They came together to rewrite the United States Constitution and to sign the Declaration of Sentiments, which proclaimed that all men and women were created equal. And during this occasion, the Declaration of Sentiments presented a list of evils against women. And I just like to share a few. And it never fascinates me to believe that these old informations are still relevant today. Here are just a few. He had compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He had withheld her from rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both native and foreigners. He had made her, if married, in the eyes of the law, civilly dead. He had denied her the facilities of obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed to her. He allows her in church as well as state, but, but in subordinate positions, claiming apostolic authority for exclusion from the ministry and with some exceptions from any public participation in the affairs of the church. End of quote. Note the last point. He allows her in church as well as state, but in subordinate positions. I've been asked to do speeches on this topic for many years. I bring to you uh, 42 years in religious pastoral church ministry. Now I'm transitioned or retired. I've had 25 years full time as a mental health professional, of what I am full time in now. So, in a sense, I've had the privilege and still having from both sides. Interestingly, 29 years ago in 1991, a force was organized called the White Ribbon Campaign, designed for the purpose of preventing gender based violence by promoting equity and transforming social norms. It is an organization that seeks men to pledge, to commit, condone, to never commit, condone, or remain silent against violence against women and girls. The historical context of this day was an instance of misogyny, which occurred at the École Polytechnique in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, on December 6, 1989, and referred to as the Montreal Massacre. The massacre resulted when 25-year-old Marc Lepine slaughtered 14 women because of his hatred toward women. In our beautiful country, there is one serious roadblock that is making it difficult to reduce more significantly violence against women and girls. That roadblock, should I say, is the power of the church through its teaching of male dominance. That's why my presentation this morning is domestic violence and the church. I'm not here defining domestic violence, although I would say we have terms like intimate partner abuse, child abuse, partner abuse, um, spouse abuse. They all have one thing in common: the use and misuse of power. As far back as 1998, in a speech I gave at the Regional Conference on Sexual and Domestic violence, and that interestingly was November 47 in 1998 at the Old Nassau Beach Hotel. I stated this: domestic violence and the church are two terms that should not be linked. Unfortunately, today we know that there is an undeniable correlation between the teachings of the church and the prevalence of violence in the home. As the cross is the center of Christianity, bringing hope and peace and certainty of salvation, ironically, in my opinion, religion has also been as and is more than ever the core fluiding agent to the development and perpetuation of violence in our families today. Violence in the community then is a direct result of violence in families. End of quote. Now, that was in 1998, and I dare to say it's still relevant today. Dr. James Alsdorf, in his book Battered into Submission, states as long as the church is quiet in a world which resonates with cries of abused women, it is failing in its ministry of reconciliation. It is simply functioning as a sounding brass and a clanging cymbal. The church is called to bind up the bruises of women who have suffered not only from the violence of their spouses, but all the passive violence of a church which has failed to recognize their situation and intervene on their behalf. End of quote. The very agent that was designed to bring healing and comfort, the church, must be must then re-examine its teachings, traditions, and practices that support the base of passions and drives for greed, of power, and control. The church can be and should be the
You
most.
rub that on the bed? You crazy?
Someone need to mute all the mics. The church can be and should be the most reliable agent for healing and restoration. The church must be a loud voice against family violence, and I believe it can be. Here's what I discovered, though, is a painful formula for violence against women. I learned this, observed this without even research per se, although research corroborates it, from working at a safe shelter in Michigan, working and doing work in Jamaica, traveling to England, St. Martin, Puerto Rico, and yay, in the Bahamas. Same thing. Here's what I discovered. When rigid traditional family values, rigid or inflexible rigid family values are combined with rigid traditional religious beliefs, there's always abuse. It never fails. There's always some form of abuse. It could be emotional, psychological, or even physical. So here is some convincing points ministers of the gospel are still seeking to enforce when the church is causing so much harm. And in the Bahamas, many ministers and social activists are telling us to go back to those old traditional values. And you know what these are? And I want you to listen. This is what the church is teaching. Return to the patriarchal family system, the patriarchal family system. So they refuse to understand there's one point. Patriarchy, the word is only used once in the Bible, and it's in the in the New Testament. It is never used in the Old Testament. It was a system that was in place during the time of the development of Christianity and before that. But it in reality, God never used patriarchy. The the patriarchal system is that the firstborn male is the CEO of the family. But every one of the patriarchs that we call patriarchs in the Bible, from David to Abram, were not the firstborn. Some of them were the last, interestingly. And then here's another point: the husband is the head of the wife. As such, he is the supreme ruler. That's what the church is teaching. Then another point: the wife's responsibility in marriage is to submit to her husband. Then the marriage will be happy. And then another point: men are born to be leaders, and they must always lead even if they do not have the skills. The church is teaching that. Another point, women can assist men, but only in subordinate positions. Another point, men are always expected to move up the managerial ladder of success. Yeah, men, you're always growing up once you are a man. And the last point on this, if a woman climbs the managerial ladder of success, it is only as the result of the permission of male organizers. That still happens in some circles. In an article by Aaron Earls in 2018 entitled Five Myths the Church Often Believes About Domestic Violence, he writes, while some pastors provide caring counsel for women who come forward, many victims hear the same rot answers when they dare to ask for help. When it comes to domestic violence, pastors often do not know how to respond to victims. A great number of ministry leaders still quote passages such as Ephesians 5, verse 22, 1 Peter 3, and verse 1 to 6, and Titus 2, 3 to 5, as they remind women to submit, to pray for their husbands, to have quiet spirits, and be obedient. These practices may work well within healthy relationships, some people say, but submission to an abuser gives him license to abuse further. End of quote. The church in general is doing something very wrong. That is, reinforcing the painful, false, and traditional beliefs that men must be in charge of women. It's a power position that they're dealing with. He is the head. Here's what Aaron Earls writes on this point. And he quotes someone else. According to Leslie Vernick, counselor and author of The Emotionally Destructive Relationship, the main characteristics of an abusive relationship is where the abuser's desire for power and control is at the root. When the church affirms an abusive man's role as the head of the home, it gives carte blanche to the man who need to be in control. It sanctions abusive behaviors and leaves the wife with no options. End of quote. So then, another academic journal entitled When She Calls for Help, Domestic Violence in Christian Families, published in 2017. And you notice these articles are coming out and coming out. Violence in relationship is a common experience for significant number of women. Vic Health in Australia has noted that one of the underlying contributing factors toward violence against women is their environment, citing faith factors toward violence against women. Faith factors let me read this again. Faith-based institutions such as churches as one such environment for many women. Indeed, institutional research shows that the language of religion is often used by women to explain abuse. Additionally, abused Christian women are more likely to remain in or return to unsafe relationships, citing religious beliefs or to support avoidance of family breakups despite abuse. In contrast, however, churches can address domestic violence within context of care, with emphasis on a theology of biblical equality. End of quote. So as I come on down to the end, there's a whole lot we can do. I can stay here with you for literally one solid week and peel away the difficulties, the problems, all the challenges we have. But let me come to the conclusion. What can the church do? One, admit that there is domestic violence and plan to do something about it. That's a challenge. If we can get them to admit and the genesis of it and the power of it, that's one. Number two, be willing to examine its own teachings or methodologies that treat women as second class citizens. That is, it must be willing to change its theology. That might also be to have seminars or workshops to review passages of scripture that usually lead men to think of themselves as being in charge rather than being partners. For example, Genesis 1:26, that is often misquoted. God placed Adam and Eve in charge of the earth, not Adam in charge of Eve or Adam only in charge of the earth. That's very clear in Scripture. Ephesians 5:25. It was not Paul's intentions to further abuse or control women. In fact, the word submit is actually the military word that means to stand beside someone your equal in the military. So Paul was actually elevating women from a low position to stand beside our husbands. Oh boy, heavy, heavy. He was liberating women. So we know all these passages. There's so many of them in the Bible. We have just misinterpreted, one that is not on abuse. We say one famous one, where two or three are gathered together in my name, He is with us. It has nothing to do with worship. It has nothing to do with church. It was about settlement of discrepancies between people. But we use it in that context. So we have many like that. Another third point, get training on how to respond to women in abusive relationships. So call me, Dr. Patterson, and many others in, or professionals from around the world, having an open mind to train how to respond to women and children in abusive relationship. Number four, examine ways how to help abusive men and boys, how to help abusive men and boys, or abusive women too. Okay. Okay. And number five, stop harboring the abuser. Stop harboring the abuser. The church is so guilty of this. When I say the church, I don't mean every single church in the Bahamas, but the church in general. My own denomination, the Seventh Day Adventist Church, did a survey 15 years ago around the world with thousands and thousands of respondents on domestic violence. Domestic violence from New Guinea to South America, from Jamaica to North America, that they discovered that domestic violence against women by men was as high as 65% in New Guinea, and there was just 25 or 35% in others. This is among the church. You have research like this among the Baptists, you have the Catholic, and every other church. Something has to change, and I'm challenging us to do it. Okay, so that's my presentation this morning. And I know we could have said more, but I hope I stimulated you with the topic. Thank you.